You're listening to The Adventuring Party for the 5th week of December 2020. This week, Cower Mere Mortals, the warlord Scarr is here to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of 5th Ed D&D. The Adventuring Party, talk about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party, O warriors true, all sworn before he, the blood-soaked leader of our band, the warrior king, the warlord, Scarr. Cheer his name, Scarr! Scarr! Oh, what wisdom have you brought us, Scarr! Scarr!
Well, my blood-soaked and battle-thirsty children, I have come here to announce my next great conquest, where I will, single-handedly, with all your help, finally defeat the great demon that is 5th edition. But first, we must know our enemy.
Down with the additions! To war! To the warlord! Scarr! Yes, absolutely. So, folks, unless it hasn't become entirely apparent, I've lost my mind. Scarr's in
You're
control.
losing your voice is the real problem.
I'm sorry, classically trained, oh boy. I'll be fine. I can shout your triumphs for the aeons. We're doing a new segment where we take the full length of an episode to really dig in on what Warlord Scarr really thinks about certain aspects of the hobby. And we're tackling a big mountain. Just straight off. Like, this is the do or die. I mean, we either cross this Rubicon and forge our way across these Alps, elephants in tow, or die trying. This will kick off the campaign, as it were. I am not a big, deep thinker. I don't purport to be, and I don't ever care to be. If there's a hot take or a meme required, I'm your man. However, I have pledged myself in service for the purposes of this campaign to someone who is Scarr here, our esteemed warlord, does many deep thinks on aspects of gaming that I find so esoteric as to be incomprehensible. But hopefully, with a little gentle prodding and perhaps the lash here and there, he will hopefully educate me in some of the deeper currents that run through the hobby. Now, you mentioned 5th Ed. 5th Ed of D&D.
Yes. I mean, I could go on a rant about 5th Ed of Call of Cthulhu, but I feel like the time's passed for that. Everyone who has, like, big opinions about gaming was probably going to run their hit piece on 5th edition at some point. Even people who are fans of it are... 5th edition is one of those fandoms where everyone loves it, but also get a drink or two into them and they'll start ranting about all its problems. But I'm not really as much focused on the problems today as to the shape of it. The game that falls out of what people have put down in the rulebooks. Because, as seen in a previous episode, there is a big push to call 5th Ed a all-knowing, all-seeing universal RPG that can handle anything. I don't really believe that in the slightest. It is an effective game system, but it definitely implies a certain game style. And I think if we're going to have proper conversations about the merits and flaws of 5th Ed, you have to be honest about what those situations that it's best for are. What it can do, what it can't do. And so I want to go to deep mechanics leading to play, because, you know, they're not separated. Anyone who tells you that they're completely separate is not lying, but in some form of, you know, trance-like hallucination.
So, you're not really taking a shot at 5th Ed per se, more that you think there's a misconception about how and where it should be applied. And because there's far too many... We're now entering what is being described as the second summer of D&D, where the 1,000 blossoms, 1,000 chrysanthemums blossom, was that the way Mao put it?
Something like that.
And everybody's producing content for 5th Ed, perhaps when they shouldn't, or where they shouldn't, or in ways that don't really make a lick of sense. And it's not necessarily the fault of 5th Ed or its writers, but, some strong leader has to draw a line somewhere, right? Some strong man.
I'm sure there's strong ladies who can destroy 5th Ed too if they really wanted to.
But the part of, to coin a phrase, the part of what you've described that really interests me, and we're going to cover all of it, is that, as you say, this is a rule set, this is a system that has been written by somebody, or some ones, and it, if run as written, leads to play in a frame, in a kind of a range of styles, but they're almost certainly have to. I mean, we've often sort of posited the idea that a system and a setting should kind of indicate what way the game should be played, ideally.
Yeah.
Not all do. We can leave aside generics. And if 5th Ed is a system with a setting, which is, broadly speaking, kind of a high fantasy that ranges somewhere between Faerun and the Forgotten Realms and, say, Eberron and what else is supporting Greyhawk, then that would indicate that there somehow out of that set of rules and systems there must emerge a rough indication what the style of play should be. And we're going to look at that today. So, am I on the right path, O Warlord?
Yes, I believe we are.
Excellent.
Let's bring up our broadswords and charge forward into this.
For the Warlord, to battle!
Okay. So
what have you got first?
The first, and I think probably the most fundamental element that you need to address when typifying your 5th Ed experience is the D20 itself. And what that implies about the type of game you're trying to run here. Because the D20 is, if you bring out a single massive dice on its own as your primary task completing mechanic, then you are putting a flag in the ground saying that you want things to be swingy. You want experts to fail and amateurs to succeed a surprising amount of the time. And that's sort of a thesis statement that sort of, by simply selecting the D20, you have made that true, even if you don't want it to be. Like, in 5th Ed, an expert in something would be like, say, a level 5 character. They have +3 in their proficiency bonus, and they have, say, 16 in their best stat. That's like a +6 bonus. That's not huge compared to the range of a D20, and that's sort of baked in. Like, if you're actually rolling a dice, the +6 helps, but it's not going to change rolling a 3 into a success. Like, it can if you get the certain brackets, but it really is not going to make the biggest of differences in what your dice roll could achieve. Like, it's like maybe one bracket either way. And
so the dice here is more important in effect than the effort to train into a skill or be good at something.
Like, it's not like the skill is not nothing. The stat modifier is not nothing, but yes, the dice is the king here. Randomness is baked in, and that creates uncertainty. And I feel like Gygax in his, 1970s quasi-wisdom probably wanted that because he didn't want absolute predictability. He didn't want a Kriegspiel like the GM sort of makes a judgment call behind the table. He wanted there to be a 2 in 6 chance that you fail your jump across the pit. He wanted, roll less than a 3, you die. And he wanted he wanted like fighters to sometimes miss sleeping dragons who are like right in front of them. Like, that's an inherent part of it. And that's why I feel the tone of 5th Ed particularly tends towards not ridiculous, but definitely on the humorous side, rather than as so much to grim or serious or determined, because you can't predict that your experts will be experts in the moment. You can't predict that someone who can't do a thing won't make a stab at it, roll a 19, and suddenly they're an expert.
It's one of the delights of the game in a certain sense, isn't it? That every so often you just have that roll where the entire party jumps to their feet when the most unbelievable thing has happened. Yeah,
that's entirely true. And living in that light is not unvirtuous, but it is a very specific style and theme. It's essentially, there's an unconscious theme in 5th Ed that delightful and weird and wonderful things will happen. And that doesn't fit the theme of every fictional idea or conception of an RPG.
So I've written here, uncertainty leading to humorous failure. And then that kind of closing a loop in a sense that you go back to plan and resolution.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about it like that before, but yeah, I suppose no plan surviving contact with the dice is that Gygax's intention?
I feel like that would probably depend on the day. I feel like if Gygax really liked a plan, he probably wouldn't have asked for a roll. If he thought it was going to work or something, he would probably either have it work, or he would have he wouldn't have someone roll a d20. He would roll a d6 behind the screen, and if it was 3 or more, he'd go through.
Yeah. He wasn't a slave to his own system, in other words. I suppose he gets to, much like other creators, he sort of gets to make it up as he goes along. Okay, so the D20, you're kind of positing that it's a foundational pillar of the game, obviously. It is a big, swingy dice, as you've said, and it can override expertise or incompetence sometimes in those moments.
Yeah.
Which can lead to humorous failure.
Humorous failure or unexpected success, which both have a thing.
Both bring their own joy. Right, and do you think that's at odds with the tone of the game as it's portrayed?
I don't. I can't say. 1,000 people say they've run extremely atmospheric and creepy versions of Curse of Strahd, but I've never really 100% bought it. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing that would lend itself well to really atmospheric horror, I feel.
On this I can say nothing. I haven't read it. I've only the barest sort of notion of what it's about, so I'm going to have to defer to you there. But I suppose just from my own experience on tables, there's a kind of undercurrent of jokiness that goes with playing D&D, that even in the most serious situations, someone will crack out a one-liner or will drop a meme or will sort of do something slightly humorous that lifts the tone, no matter how grim the poor beset GM might be attempting to make everything seem. So I have to say, I think you're onto something there, Warlord. That is certainly a prong of attack. I think you've uncovered something there.
Yeah.
So if we move beyond the D20 itself, what do we have?
Well, I feel like that sort of flows into the next topic, which is the topic of bonuses and numbers. We didn't notice this as much in 3rd Ed or Pathfinder. The D20 was still the main mechanic, but there were an awful lot more tools available to control the swinginess. It was more than possible for someone to build 2. Well, even if I roll a 2, I have a +8 in my skill at level 2 or something, and that means I can't fail basic tasks and something like that. Because bonuses were more available, people could control the D20 more. Whereas 5th Ed has made a very marked effort to get away from bonuses and towards more dice-based mechanics. You'll see there's very few effects other than magic items that give you, say, a flat +5 to something. But there are spells that, the spell that gives you a +d4 to your dice roll, or the main one is the advantage mechanic. And Advantage is, a good mechanic all around, but the problem is that it's the only mechanic, and that means player control of things is sharply limited in a certain way. And I feel that actually sort of makes bonuses more important when I feel like the intent was to make bonuses less important. Like, if you're never going to get a spell that gives you +5 to your intimidate or whatever, then getting your charisma or strength to that big cap of 20 becomes far more important, because it's the only reliable way that you're going to be better at your character's thing, as it were.
So just to put a ring around that, you're talking about, I think we've all played versions of D&D where you'd kind of go around the table hunting for just one more +1 to hit a target number, and you're saying that now in 5th Ed, we've less of that, much less of that. Advantage, disadvantage, and then a couple of big bonuses.
Yeah.
Are kind of the way we play. Yeah, I think that seems fairly good. And is that an effort to speed up play at the...
Oh, absolutely. It is very much an effort to get away from, spending 5 minutes on your turn doing the math and get to the quote unquote fun part of rolling the dice. It absolutely is that. They understand the effort, but it also brings with it, a lack of options for controlling things. And also it makes it puts a bigger emphasis on individuality. Like, I'm probably going to come back to the idea of the 5e party as a collection of individuals a couple of times, but because the absolute most that someone can do to help someone is, I have proficiency on this skill. Can I help my friend? And and the DM will say, sure, your friend can roll with advantage. And that's about it. There's no good solid mechanic for, an entire team teaming up A-team style to hodgepodge something together. There's no equivalent to the skill challenge system of 4th Ed, which, while it had its weirdness, was an attempt to turn, the bard talks to the king and wins into a full encounter. But 5e doesn't have that mechanism, and thus the emphasis on a team doing things to improve the team chances is sort of lost. There's no way for someone to just give someone a +1 to a roll. Insignificant as it might be in the vast swingy nature of the D20, it still might be more useful than nothing.
Right. The skill check thing has sort of gone out the window, is it? Or sorry, the group check.
There's suggestions there.
Just looking at the working together section, yeah. So as you say, it's the help action, and that's pretty much it. And then
there's a group check, but that's sort of it doesn't feel great because the way the group check system in the book is laid out, it's more about preventing, the weak party members from failing than making the party as a whole strong.
Yeah.
And that I don't think is a well defined for. It seems to me more designed to go, armored fighter, Dex 6 wizard, you guys have messed up our group stealth check, and now it's your fault we have to fight all these dragons. I don't think it's really conducive to, we've worked together and did a Hail Mary pass, which a system, let's say, added a dice based on characters might have done.
I see.
But again, now there's this trade-off here between I'm not saying, for example, that the system is inherently bad. I'm saying it's trade-off. You've got the powerful and simple advantage-disadvantage system, which is great for an awful lot of tasks, but it comes at a cost of hunting for bonuses elsewhere and lack of teamwork, as it were.
And you think it pushes the game back onto collection of individuals style of role playing. Okay. So does that mean everyone who shows up for the game really kind of has to worry about their own corner of the game and not seek or isn't encouraged to look for ways to work together?
The game does not encourage them as strongly as it could. Like, it's still absolutely possible for someone to play support or to help their buddy in a pinch, but it's less emphasized as it could be. So if you're looking for, your commando team in a mission game, I'm not certain that 5th Ed is going to give you the best feel for that, because it's going to split up into like groups of 2, giving each other the help action to succeed at skill checks, and it's going to feel quite reductive at the end.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I guess that means in any given situation, there's one character who's kind of taking the action and presumably taking the credit, and everyone else is sort of like, I helped. or one other person's like, I helped. Yeah. So where do we go from there? So we've covered, that's the bonuses and numbers pushing us towards, relying on a couple of big standard bumps, as you say, ability scores and the odd spell, and then getting us away from cooperative action, and rather everyone's sort of seeking their own bit of limelight. So what does that lead us to?
Well, fortunately, I don't have quite as smooth a jump to the next one.
Okay, well, let's leap to a new front then. The Warlord operates on many.
It's an outflanking maneuver.
Excellent. Lead on, Warlord.
Okay.
Where to
the next
next
one is the other great bugbear of D&D, hit points. Now, I won't go into a massive breakdown of the pros and cons of the hit point system. That's another episode. I'll just summarize by thinking I have a good theory about why hit points are so popular a system, and I want to really give that the time of day at a proper, a more full debatey episode. But
they're what we're working with today, aren't they? D&D, it's hit points. It's everything and then nothing. You hit 0 and then you're out. If you're not on 0, you're brilliant.
Well, I don't want to get into that element, but I do want to very specifically point out the weird place that hit points has put 5th Ed in that hit points are sort of an automatic combat lengthener mechanic. It is, if you have the hit points imply that you want people to be taking and trading blows, and it's not for definite that any one swing of the sword will be the clincher in any fight. It is a statement that fights are longer. They take multiple things to do anything. There's going to be very few one-shot kills, particularly on the player side. And if you start a fight, you are in for a long haul. Is sort of an inherent element of that.
It's about whittling at that, really, isn't it? It's about whittling away numbers or hit points if it's, yeah.
And
okay.
That's the merits flaws that, again, that's another episode, but I feel like 5th Ed has tried to balance both the need for big drama and the need for hit points as a recognizable mechanic to make your fights have a certain pacing. It is trying to square this by making hit points big, but also making damage big. So it has the capability for the long combat, but it also has these explosive bursts of damage where someone will have like 100 hit points on one round, and they go into a fight. The enemies roll sucky. They take like 10 points of damage. They say, this is fine. Let's keep going. And then next round, there's 2 crits, and all of a sudden they're on 3 hit points, can't get out, and are going to a panicky mode. So this flank might not be the best one to push. I guess what I'm saying is that there's a very deliberate pacing to this kind of combat, and it's if someone wants like a 5-hour fight or a 5-second fight, 50 is probably not going to give them quite the experience they're hoping for. If you're the kind of person who wants to be sneaking up behind guards and just cracking their necks, you're sort of asking the DM to ignore one of the major systems of the game. It's just like,
yeah, it is. It does kind of break with some of the elements of the fantasy that D&D purports to be, doesn't it? There aren't those insta-kills, as you say, outside of very particular builds and very particular situations. And I suppose does it kind of always expect that the shape of combat is two sides will sort of line up on a battlefield and have at it for a few rounds until one side kind of prevails and rolls over the other. It doesn't seem to have too many shapes for other sorts of conflicts.
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. I think one of them is the fact that everyone or every small group of monsters is supposed to have their own initiative to thing. It's like it creates an atmosphere where everyone's action is supposed to be important, and a lot of the tension of combat is in figuring out how to maximize your action in a situation where you could roll 5 3s in a row and miss and fail everything.
Because of hit points, everyone has important actions, but it's never certain that any one action will be decisive.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's meant to be a sort of a deliberate thing of make your turn the best it can, as opposed to trying something dramatic to swing the entire thing. And I mean, we could go deeper on this into the whole, hit points versus save or die effects, and so forth. But we've had previous episodes about that before. And, it's an ongoing, raging battle that's been going for nearly 50 years at this point.
Huh. So, at the top of this, we open with hit points. But hit points effectively extend combat. They lead to a situation where you're trying to close the gap on 0 without ever having access to something decisive that will do that for one person, or for one group all at once, outside of maybe AoEs, things like that. And it takes us out of certain combat resolutions that might rely more on ambush or surprise or trickery. And it's almost always a race to see who can get whose hit points down to 0 first.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily every kind of fantastic encounter or high fantasy.
It also leads into a side topic on the resting mechanic. And this is one of those things that is, I feel like this has sort of become, the thing that the 5e fans have noticed but not really acted upon. It's like one of the biggest things you'll see in DM advice columns for 5th Ed is, I want to have a big boss encounter, but my players keep using all their best spells in, one big fight and destroy everything. How do I do it? Do I just send 50 Trask against them? And the answer to that is, of course, that there's supposed to be a flow of pacing of a given in-game day. You're supposed to be going through a series of interesting encounters, messing around with things, making mistakes, having unexpected successes because, the D20. And you're supposed to be balancing your resources alongside the available time for resting. But people are expecting massive dramatic fights and climactic things, not the slow burn of a dungeon crawl. And
this is known colloquially as the adventuring day when it's discussed in the rules, and it's typically something in the order of 6 or so encounters of varying difficulty.
I believe the current suggested amount is 6, But I've very rarely done that because it's this weird situation where that kind of gameplay essentially requires a dungeon crawl or similar spread out setup of encounters.
No time to rest.
Yeah, which is a problem because the system is based around getting regular short rests, which take just enough time to be inconvenient in a dungeon, but not enough time that really compares to the big long rest you have at the end of the day.
Yeah, I've actually had the opportunity to do it under 5th Ed rules, and it kind of became known at the table as the grinder, because when you actually apply the 6 to 8 encounter sort of suggestion that the adventure day holds, you run into a big problem where the value of certain classes drops dramatically when they don't have access to nap time. And we were using the cinematic variant of rest, so a short rest was like 15 minutes. But if you keep pounding on a team or a party with the grinder or the adventuring day, then those like classes like Warlock run up against a wall very quickly.
Yeah.
And they have very limited options going into the 4th and 5th and 6th encounter. Now, it did make for incredibly tense play, but I only inflicted it over the course of nearly 2 years. I only inflicted it on the party once, maybe twice, and it was kind of memorable, and I suppose it was nice to see it in action, but I don't think anyone really felt like they wanted to play that way continuously.
Yeah. So that's the thing, is like, 5th Ed has got this weird crossroads between a long, grindy dungeon crawl and the big climactic encounter. And not sure it inherently knows how to square that circle. But it also means that,
oh yeah,
okay, I keep saying the word square the circle, but part of that is sort of the everyman nature of 5th Ed, where it's trying to appeal to everyone. So it sort of unconsciously sits in the middle ground between really doing one thing as opposed to, going to one of the extremes. But basically what I'm saying is that if you want a system where every battle is this meaningful, climactic, drawn out thing where you use all your tricks, or you want D&D to be a long, drawn out, slow grind against the murk of the dungeon below, it might not quite pull off either of those without the GM taking very particular attention to his or her pacing, or you're using variant rules in order to get people to play in a different way. Like, I've tried this myself. I've tried using the longer resting rules in my my jungle island exploration game, and while that had the effect of making them value places to sleep a lot more, it didn't really change. They didn't become more efficient with their resources, as it were. They still wanted to use all of their big blowout abilities in big fights. They just would do blowout, then do a second blowout, grind through the third, and then sail off on the ship to find port and rest up for the 3 days to try again.
To recharge their powers. Right. Okay. Now, I mean, how much of that are we laying at the feet of the rules? Like, I agree there's a mismatch between the suggestion given to the dungeon master or the games master of how to structure encounters and when they should occur, and the hard and fast stated rules about how short and long rests work and what classes get what abilities back and when. That's a circle that does need to be squared, and a definite weakness in the structure of the game, because on one side it's clearly stated for the players what to expect, and on the other side it's sort of vaguely suggested as to what the GM should do about it.
And this is where you get the OSR people raving about 10-minute dungeon turns and random encounters and such.
Right.
And
so it is a mismatch, but what are we taking from this mismatch in terms of what the game is telling us about how it intends to be played?
It intends to be played with. I feel like the written rules are sort of intending players to back off constantly and be rested up for every fight and mitigate their things, and that sort of goes against a lot of player desires. It is very possible to, use this kind of thing where each fight is sort of has a line drawn under it and, there's a scene transition. But it's not a universal pacing thing. And while 50 is robust enough that people can use the altered pacing of the gigantic one-a-day climatic encounter or the slow grind versus kobolds, the optimal situation is one which might not automatically come out of a given narrative conceit. Like,
right.
not every fight is going to be in 1 hour intervals at a different cool warehouse or whatever.
Okay. Can we leap to the next topic then? Unless we can square this circle. Can we?
No. I think that's sort of an inherent ambiguity. Is that because it doesn't want to commit to. It wants to apply the given structure, but doesn't want to commit to it. So argue over it is going to lead you down the variant rule rabbit hole, and that's not going to lead to tremendously strong conclusions. I do want to, however, quickly talk about the attitude towards permanent injury, or injuries that last more than a good night's sleep.
Okay.
5th Ed has them, but they're very much special effects. Like, this monster reduces your hit points by 5, or max hit points. This monster gives you a disease, you need to make this many constitution saves versus this many medicine checks, etc. The idea of a given fight or a given character having long-term consequence is basically entirely absent, except as a special permission granted by the monster stat block. And again, that's sort of setting a tone of consequence as a very momentary thing. Like, in a given fight, you could be being mauled. You could be having 5 types of paralysis on you, and, monsters are just carving up your internal organs. But then, once that dramatic moment is past, you spend some spells and potions, and you move on to the next dramatic consequence. The idea of a consequence carrying over to the next major encounter is sort of lost. Instead, it's more framed as the resources. It's not about coming out of each fight in a certain situation. It's how many of my magic bullets did I spend? How many times do I need to mop my brow? It's a very specific attitude to things, and it sort of leads into this whole, the big damn encounter model, is that the drama is in the moment rather than as a growing thing over the course of your adventuring day or adventuring week or your quest or campaign. And again, this is not a terrible thing, because I'm sure everyone has a story of a system where, you stub your toe, you're out of action for a month, and the game didn't really have any ways to get people back into the fray, or to successfully skip the month to get people to play together. So, to a certain extent, avoiding this paradigm of big, 3 of your arms been lopped off problem is somewhat virtuous because it keeps the emphasis on play and the group being together, and you're all the party and you're having fun, and no one has to retire the favorite character because, you know, 3 other arms are lopped off or whatever.
Unless they're multi-classing into Black Knight, in which case they'll have you. So this is a very kind of a Looney Tunes screen wipe kind of thing. Once you've set the next scene, everyone's got their limbs reattached and have fought off the sniffles or the plague or whatever it was that they had, and are fighting fit again.
Yeah. Again, it's not a bad thing, but it very much leads into this sort of fun first, play first mentality. And while virtuous, particularly as the way that a lot of people get into the hobby, it is not going to fit all playstyles. It's going to feel less serious and less dramatic to people who are seeking seriousness and drama. And
yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the diseases and poison section of the DMG, and really, like within a couple of paragraphs, they've sort of hand waved away most diseases. Nothing in the fantasy world of D&D in terms of diseases or plagues can really do much against magical healing. Like there's at least 2 or 3 low-level spells that you can acquire very easily from class features or spell lists that'll simply trivialize any kind of disease you might pick up. And the book doesn't list a lot of them. There's 3 detailed, I think, and there might be a few more in places like Xanthar's Guide to Everything. It's not really... It's featured in the game because I suppose in fantasy sometimes people get sick or get a disease of some sort, but D&D doesn't really set out to make it a thing. But they do take up a few pages with it, which I find a little weird. Like, why bother with any of this if all I have to do is pester the party paladin for 5 minutes?
Yeah. It's a... And then again, we could go on about why don't they just resurrect the king every time he dies thing, but that's probably the thing. In the pursuit of enabling play and enabling people to keep their characters intact from one story beat to the next and one dramatic thing to the next, with the only real threat of them being in the moment of a particularly harsh or unlucky encounter, a lot of dramatic weight is lost on, what do we do in that encounter? Oh, well, it doesn't really matter. We've already forgotten how many orcs there were.
So, if we were to take a more generous view of this, could we say that it's trivial for the players? Because while the kingdom might be ravaged with plague or misfortune, they're the ones who, for sort of Dawn of the Dead reasons, or Left 4 Dead is one that comes to mind, reasons aren't affected, and therefore are in a position to do something about it.
Yeah, that's entirely perfectly fine way to take on it. That's perfectly valid, but it is a very specific choice. It's like, these are, for want of a better word, the chosen ones. And if you want to run something like Woofrup, where it is very much a rags to riches or death story, then the 5th Ed paradigm is going to fight you every step of the way, because the 5e paradigm wants people to roll up their characters, play their characters, risk their characters in these moments, and then move on to the next cool plot moment. And the fact that you're not building up a cadre of enemies, like, D&D is one of the worst for having a recurring villain, unless they literally have, this guy comes back to the dead every Tuesday on their on their stat block. D&D is so focused towards dealing with this encounter here and now that...
Okay, so that's kind of neatly taking us from the permanence of the characters in D&D to this kind of the niggling problem of how do you keep anything else alive in the face of your players, including the big bad. What do you think the D&D rules have to say about that?
They very much want you to make that guy a spellcaster. You know, he can cast teleport. Like, but if you want, or make him undead, or something similar, or a horrible abomination, like, you could always hand wave away. Someone is, you know, like literally the god of nightmares is bringing this person back to life every time they want you. But that you are going to be sort of going against a sort of inherent social contract there of this is the encounter with this person. We're going to deal with them. Maybe we'll try diplomacy. Maybe we'll try charming him or putting a curse on him or something to make him not a threat. But this is the fight with them. They're not walking away unless they teleport away. And
that's in the GM's gift, really, isn't it? Unless the players pull a particularly cunning maneuver, it's up to the GM whether the big bad is wearing his plot armor or not for this encounter.
Yeah, like a GM can always figure out some way to do it, but there is this sort of inherent element of, because each encounter is sort of its own big deal, and there's so few ways to, you know, draw that out. Like, just look at the opportunity attack rules versus the weird complicated ones we had in 3rd Ed. You can see a different intent in them. Like, in 5th Ed, the point of those rules is to stop people from running away and keep them in the fight, because that's more dramatic than running away, apparently. There's an inherent bias towards this is an ongoing thing. You overcome it now. Sorry, this is not going to be an ongoing thing. Like, the next villain is going to be the next guy up the chain. Like, you have to come up with, you know, a higher level villain. Like, even if a villain did manage to escape, because the party's probably leveled up afterwards, and each level is this noticeable bump in things, you either have to start making up that this villain who lucked his way into getting away before has either somehow grinded 3 levels since you last saw him, or has gained, like, magical vampire powers or something to that effect in order to justify this, a probably quite substantial buff to make them still relevant. That's, how to put this. The game and its setup implies this sort of, this is today's problem, tomorrow's problem has to be different. We have to be trying something different. We have to be growing in levels, escalating in threat, and it needs to go from the evil Baron to the evil Count to the evil King to the evil Emperor to, you know, the God Emperor of the universe as a progression, because we're going to be going through each level of the pyramid like a wrecking ball.
So how well do you think 5th Ed does in selling that tier of play concept? The kind of low-level adventure to mid-tier to epic, kind of taking on world-ending threats sort of thing?
I think it does rather well, honestly. Like, even with the whole flattened math thing, you can feel the difference between, like, a first, particularly at lower levels. Like, you go from 1st level to 3rd level, it's night and day. You go from 3rd level to 5th level, it's still this big chunk of things. So suddenly you go from a competent person to doing double your damage, throwing around fireballs, you know, slitting throats like it's nothing. There's a definite strong level of escalation, and also because leveling is relatively fast.
Yeah.
There often will not be time for a one-time villain to justify their improvement. Like we're talking about a system where the bad guy you fight at, like, level 3 probably has like 6 hit dice, 2 or 3 attacks. But like at level 5, you probably need someone who has like 10 or 12 hit dice, maybe 4 attacks, and some spells, and his AC is like 3 points higher.
Right. That's for a fully statted out NPC adversary, rather than something from the Monsters Manual.
But then again,
I think it is interesting how... Sorry.
No, I'm just saying maybe there is sort of intent to make the Monster Manual more relevant, to pull out big high CR creatures out of it. Yeah. But like you keep saying it again and again, like most of the adventure paths, they stop at like level 11 or so. Like they'll get you to like level 11 and call it a day, and you'll have a big climactic fight with like CR 25 bad guy who just sort of has their leg caught in a trap or something similar to take off half their hit points and debuff their really worst attacks. So I'm not sure where I'm going with this.
I think on the flip side, for players, I think it's kind of interesting that you see a lot of the kind of capstone abilities show up around level 15 in the classes.
Yeah.
Despite the fact there's roughly 20 levels of play, and you're kind of expecting to reach a pinnacle. You reach that pinnacle in a class long before you run out of road to play that class, which I always thought was a weakness of previous editions. You were getting that capstone ability, or that unique sort of thing that a class can do at the very end of progression, by which time, well, you're probably finished playing.
Yeah.
So it's certainly 5th Ed seems to sell that idea of attaining mastery a little bit earlier and giving you a chance to play with that for a little bit longer before you have to before you run out of road and have to ascend to demigodhood. Like that to me feels like a place where it's selling the high fantasy aspect of the game pretty well. Over a long period of time, say 2 or 3 years playing, getting to 15th level isn't terribly hard. And there's at least some written material to support it in terms of published adventures. So let's regroup. What else? We're kind of an hour in. What else do we need to talk about if we're going to round out
two major points? Like,
okay, let's hammer down on those.
The first one is Armour Class.
All right,
and this is less like this is about what kind of game Armour Class creates as the feeling that it's not going to give if you have something else. Like, let's just say you're playing your modern game, your Stargate or whatever, and the players are up against a tank. Like a T-34 rolls out of the forest, and they start fighting it with their broadswords, I guess. Like, what's the armor class of a tank?
Well, it's a bit of siege weaponry, isn't it, as far as fantasy characters are concerned? What's the armor class of a tank? I have no idea.
Yeah,
40. Yeah, something high.
That implies that the reason that anti-personnel weapons are good is because they're so accurate. No, I'm very, very, being very facetious here is because I'm trying to say that while the abstraction of, combat skill versus how much plate you have around your thighs is more acceptable in a medieval game, once you start moving into like major disparities in materials and you need to start putting in something like an armor penetration system.
Okay. Now bear in mind, armor class in some part derives from a character's dexterity.
Yeah, in some part.
So
like,
there's an element of movement here that's being represented by this number that we think of as armor, but is also avoiding getting hit.
Yeah, but like, people don't assume that the problem with fighting a tank is, hitting it, although maybe they should.
Well, we do get bonuses for attacking larger creatures.
Not in 5th Ed.
Not in 5th Ed, no. Oh dear, my edition knowledge has slipped.
Yeah, that is one of the things that always tripped me up as well. It's just like, giants do have to wear armor as well, and...
Right.
But, my point here being is that when you start equating dodging with thick armor, there's only so far that abstraction can go. You can get it up to, the element where you're firing arrows at people and there's shields and there's full plate and maybe someone has a magic force field. That's fine, but when you're getting up to modern stuff where people can legitimately shoot each other through brick walls, and that's not that's perfectly realistic for someone to just take their AK to some drywall and destroy the person behind it. The abstraction falls apart very quickly. Now, I'd imagine that something like, say, the upcoming Hellboy 5e can probably get away from it because, it's going to be mostly pistols and giant revolvers filled with holy water and silver gratings. It can probably justify that well enough, but I'm really curious as to how the Stargate game would intend to have, Armour Class. Are they actually intending to have people fight gold fighters just by pointing their guns in the air? Wait, that was actually in the movie. Maybe I'm making a very bad point.
But the Warlord is pointing out, of course, the very narrow frame in which AC makes sense. And modern projectile-based combat, AC doesn't make a lick of sense.
Yeah,
really.
And also, there's no really good cover mechanic for 5th Ed yet.
No.
It has a cover mechanic, and it does come into use. People probably should be using it more, but it's again this sort of, it's actually one of the few ways to get really good AC bonuses that aren't advantage disadvantage. But it is still a simple system, and people used to seeing people, matrix dodge through columns and pillars and vaulting walls and tossing grenades, probably going to find that insufficient, but it depends. I guess it sort of depends on what sort of mil-sim level you're looking for. And as I say, with something like Hellboy, the gun goes bang is probably going to cover 90% of your problems, but, I'm really curious as to how Stargate...
does the Warlord feel like AC, the whole Armour Class system, works well enough for the fantasy medieval melee and spell combat?
Yes, I think it does do well enough for that, but I would then be curious to see if you were going to be going backwards in time. It would still work for Greek and Roman stuff, but it is very much tied to the concept of armor as your major defense. And if you're going back to something like, say, African fantasy or American native fantasy, suddenly, your armor myth sort of starts fading away, and you need to start thinking of alternative bonuses and alternative ways, because the math works out that if you don't have AC 14, you're basically a dead man or woman.
Well, bear in mind, of course, that you need really strong armor when you're dealing with really strong weapons. I mean, armor in the European medieval sense developed along the lines it did because the weaponry had become so well forged and made of such high quality material that you did have to adopt something better than bones or sticks or boiled leather. The Native Americans and the African empires had armor that was, or ways of shielding themselves that were probably sufficient for the times, and mobility played a huge part in their means of warfare.
But I think we're at risk of getting into medieval and classical simulationism, and that's a completely different podcast.
When the conquistadors show up in South America, then you've got a clash of systems. Like your AC 18 breastplate isn't the same as the AC-18 sort of Jaguar hide that's being worn by a holy warrior of the Jaguar Temple. Like there's a huge mismatch in terms of I think there's a kind of a scaling issue there that you see in games like Rifts, where you kind of have to start talking about mega armor or mega damage when you get a clash of technologies or levels of technology. But if you were playing entirely in the sphere of, say, one of these Aztec or Incan empires, you could still have the range of armor classes. It's being kind of decided by different things, because obsidian weapons don't cut or pierce as well as a forged steel or iron.
I think that's workable, but then there's another talk about objectivity in rules, but that's again another topic.
Okay, well, AC was one of your big ones to finish on. We're going to have to push on to the last big spike for today.
This is a very tiny and sort of noodly topic, but movement only matters so much, and mobility and moving around is sort of something that you do to get into a fight, but then you're sort of locked in place from there on because you're in your melee phase and you're cutting down your opponents. There's no footsies in D&D. There's no backing off from an enemy to get space. Because
without
that would
it costing you a major action, disengage.
There's no 5-foot step anymore. And while people complained about the incoherence of the 5-foot step in 3.5 and Pathfinder days, now we're in this weird spot where position only matters to this very minor degree, and there's never any advantage of repositioning, even though, like, all the best fight scenes in a movie, people are doing footsies, they're backing off, they're giving ground, they're moving from, the command center of the rebellion to, like, the lava pits above Mustafar.
If I may interject with a more genre appropriate, when the Dread Pirate Roberts fights Inigo Montoya.
Oh yeah, that is very
Cliffs
much
of Madness.
Yeah, that is very much where I'm going with this. It's like this this back and forth duel between experts. I mean, we're going to start going into how the mechanics of hit points don't really do dueling as well, but that's again another topic. But yeah, that sort of thing is like, if you're hoping for that sort of back and forth thing, dynamic, use every part of the scene, jump up on the table for +2 combat, 5e is probably not going to give you that experience as much, because as written, you get up to someone and you start swinging away at them, and the best thing he could do is, swing back to get your hit points down and make you retreat. And even though there's this weird quirk of the opportunity attack rules where you can walk around someone as much as you want, as long as you don't walk away from them, it's not going to make a huge difference because, especially since, like, there's no restriction on when you use your movement. You can, walk 10 foot up to someone, whack them, walk 10 feet over the next person, whack them, and then walk 10 feet back to where you started. So positioning is sort of always arbitrary, and to an extent I get that, because of they're trying to, again, square a circle between people who like using miniatures, people who like theatre of the mind.
Well, hold on, can we be clear here? Because the movement, you can break up your move in 5e, and you can move around, as you say, without incurring attacks of opportunity. Now, to an extent. But it is repositioning. It is that kind of flow of position, because presumably that might put you in range of another creature, or it might allow you to launch a second attack. Like, that's explicit in the rules. You can break up your move if you've got more than one attack to launch attacks against different creatures within your movement range. But of course, bearing in mind reactions, attacks of opportunity, and entering other creatures' squares. But that's not really how we see the game played, is it?
No, we see people walk up to bad guys and start swinging because...
Kind of rock'em sock'em nights.
Yeah. Because there's no mechanic to encourage people to move around, and very often because they're playing on a napkin with pen rather than with any miniatures, they often not only will the players not see an opportunity to move 5 feet to the right and stab a passing goblin, often the GM won't even think it's possible because they don't have visibility on it. And
do you think that's kind of in some way exacerbated by some of the things we discussed? Like, why make that attack? It's probably not going to be a decisive moment. So I'll just focus all of my damage onto this one opponent until they go to 0, and then move on to the next.
Partly, yeah. Like, people want to avoid hits, but, like, not that much. Like, particularly if you're a raging barbarian, because the only position that matters is getting to the position of killing the person you don't like the most. I very often see a barbarian just go into a rage, just run past, like, a whole bunch of combatants who tickle them with their spears, and then start whacking on the main bad guy.
Yeah, I've seen it too. It's a favorite. Any high AC class can pretty much ignore the front lines if they fancy it and go straight for the spellcasters. To great effect in D&D as it's written. And that's certainly it makes it much harder to shield those squishy combatants from the raging barbarian.
Yeah, and this is not to say that mobility is useless, because you can still have, like, your tumbling monk who can just zip across the battlefield to focus down another threat. But it is very much once you're in base-to-base contact with someone, you know, you're there for the duration until one of you is dead.
There's no incentive to move between opponents unless they're on the ground bleeding out. Okay, unless perhaps there's a debuff or some other effect in play, but that's very much down to whatever class and particular abilities you have to hand. Okay, we've run way over an hour now, so as your major domo, Warlord Scarr, you must break from the battle to rest, to recuperate, and to consider your long-term objectives. Is there, in your mind, then, having run through some of this stuff, is there in your mind something you can synthesize as the way the game is suggesting you play it?
It's suggesting a game where you have these major interesting encounters, and then you draw a line under it, and you move to the next one. It is about going through these cool, compelling pieces of content, chewing them over, saving the flavor, putting a little bit under your tongue or whatever. And these well-crafted moments happen, and people have fun, and then you move on to the next one. You are not so much following a chain. It is entirely possible to do this completely non-linearly, but it is about you go from one thing to the other, but each is distinct. Each is its own thing, and you're not going to be entirely sure what's going to happen there. It may do something weird. It may, you may fail. You may kill the major bad guy the first time you meet him, but each individual thing is going to matter in the moment. And each element, because a combat is longer, each one is going to have its own emphasis. Yeah, for all the talk about Fourth Ed and its major encounter design and its breakdown and its battle mats and such, I really feel like Fifth Ed really does personify the concept of D&D as a game of encounters. And they can be social encounters, they can be exploration, puzzle encounters, but yeah, they're meant to be these discrete pieces of things you can do and then move on. And it's going to be jokey, it's going to be explorative, it's going to be playful. And again, none of these things are inherently bad, but they are themselves. They are truth. And if you're going to just put a lick of bullet strewn paint over this, you're still going to get a very similar game. And that can be fine for you, but if you're going for a theme or a tone, you're going for serious stuff, you're going to something where one bullet decides everything, or you're going for something where, you're slowly going mad, or slowly your body's breaking down from the stress of it all. Or if you want to, fight Inigo Montoya on top of the cliffs of madness, you're going to have to fill in a lot of gap. And maybe you could do that, but maybe there's another system for that. But anyway, this I declare as the Warlord Scarr. These things I hold to be self-evident. And I think we should go find another battlefield. What say you, Minor Domo?
Let me survey the wreckage of this, your most epic campaign. We have covered some of the big pillars of the D20 5th Ed system. And some we have found perfectly fit for purpose, others we have found wanting, and they have been purged and put to the sword, as befits their failure. Overall, I'd say, yes, it is time to move on. When next the Warlord takes the field, it'll be on some other topic, some other battlefield, but do not expect it to be merciful. Do not expect it to be short. But hopefully you've enjoyed this, and you will join us again when the Warlord next issues the call to battle. But for now, this party's over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at theadventureparty.net and our Facebook page. You can leave comments there or on Twitter through @adventuringpty. Those can be contacted by email at party@theadventureparty.net or directly at Scarr and Savage @theadventureparty.net. Or you can get through to us on our Discord channel. The Adventure Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike Version 3 license.